jumping into layperson as priest. And like I said, it sounds like a contradiction. Because when we think of priest, what's the first thing we think of? The guy with the clothes on Sunday, like the colorful stuff up front that wears a collar and says Mass. But to understand the layperson as priest, we have to understand priest in a broader sense. We have to understand Jesus' priesthood. And to understand Jesus' priesthood, we have to understand the priesthood that he fulfilled. So the priesthood of the Old Testament. So today's going to be a little bit more of a slant of some biblical study. So all of the quotes, I think, are in front of you, generally speaking. So we're going to look a little bit at Old Testament. We're going to look at a few priests of the Old Testament. We're going to look at how Christ fulfills the priesthood of the Old Testament. And then what does that mean for us? Right? So, by way of review, though, let's begin by looking at a short review from session 1. So, last time we talked about what? We talked about the laity, the plight and the vocation of the layperson as a positive existence, right? It's not just a negative. You're not just not a priest. You're not just not a nun. You're not just not something. A layperson has a positive existence, right? And what is that positive existence? With Cardinal Arenzi in the documents, we broke down a definition that basically the laity are those who are commissioned by baptism to consecrate the world to God, right? So the laity are called to be what? The salt, the light, the leaven. The soul of society. Christ uses those three images, and then ancient Christians use that image of the soul of society. So the laity are called to witness in the world in word and in deed, through all the secular order. Basically, we're supposed to season all of the secular order with a witness of faith, both through word and through deed. And I remember last time I had given a little bit of homework. Think of a way that you can share in word and in deed the gospel every day. And it was like I remember seeing a couple of faces like, "Ooh, that's kind of hard." And yeah, exactly. The Christian life, we're not made for comfort. We're made for what? Greatness, right? So after that kind of like situated our discussion, then we broke down kind of the thesis of the class. So only from the inside of the church's mystery of communion is the identity of the lay faithful made known and their fundamental dignity revealed. So only in relationship can we understand our identity, right? And only within this context, only within this identity, can their vocation and their mission in the church and in the world be defined. So relationship leads to identity. What identity leads to mission? RIM. Relationship, identity, mission. So that's kind of that's going to be our formula for working through this class. Relationship, identity, mission. And then lastly, all our understanding of the lay identity and mission must be seen in light of an active and intimate relationship with God. We have to be rooted in our prayer. We have to be rooted in, first, our relationship with God. Then we can be rooted in our identity and mission. Which is why last time we ended with 15 minutes of adoration. We had benediction, and then your homework on the last page was to go home and pray for 15 minutes with the readings of the week, like the readings of the day, just as a way to continue that relationship. Because what? A relationship is not an encounter. It's not a one-time thing. A relationship relies on consistency. So your homework is gonna, whatever other homework I give, that's only compounded on top of pray for 15 minutes a day. That should be like our baseline every day. Of we want to be in a relationship, we need to stay consistent with our prayer life. Because Jesus is another person, right? Jesus isn't like this abstract idea. Jesus is a person. And that's who we're committing to. So if we ignore a relationship with a friend, that relationship's going to digress. Right? Or regress, not digress. Wrong word. Anyway, so today we're going to move on. And now what we had said at the end of last time was we're baptized into Christ's identity. Right? We're baptized into his identity as priest prophet, and king. Now, the next three classes, today and the next two, are going to take the form of priest today, prophet next time, and then the last one is going to be king in this kind of, this triad. So, we're going here today. These are going to be your next ones of laity as prophet. As you can tell, there's nothing there. And session 4, laity as king. Again, there's a nice picture and nothing there, because I haven't got that far. But anyway, for today, we're going to priest. This whole identity, though, this threefold identity of Christ, it's explained in the Vatican, in one of the Vatican II documents, the document on the laity. That's got a nice Latin name that's going to be hard for me to say because I'm not a Latin scholar. Apostolicam Actuositatem. Anybody watching on YouTube is going to think, ha ha ha, he messed up, but I don't really know if that's right or not. So anyway, as sharers in the role of Christ as priest, prophet, and king, the laity have their work cut out for them in the life and activity of the church. So basically, Vatican II recognized that the laity got a hard job in front of them. Like, it's not easy. We don't rely on just like the priests to do their job, the nuns to do their job. The laity have a dignity and have a pretty hard job. Like, and actually, in a lot of ways, harder than the priests, harder than the religious. Because where are the laity supposed to be? In the secular world. So like, at the office is where you're witnessing. In your family, that's where you're witnessing. It's much, in a real way, it's a lot harder because priests are going to be accepted because we're at church. You know, nuns and things are going to be accepted mostly because you're in a little bit more of a confined space. The layperson is kind of out there on their own. So the Vatican II Council wasn't ignoring this. Like, they recognized there's a hard part of being a layperson in the world. To continue, their activity is so necessary within the church communities that without it, the apostolate of the pastors is often unable to achieve its full effectiveness. So not only is the layperson's mission hard, but it's necessary. It's something that's much harder. Like I said, it's a lot harder a lot of times. And honestly, the mission of the church is going to be incomplete without the laity doing their job, without the laity pulling their weight and doing their part. Now, I know last time I mentioned things like I had put the slide up about getting involved, and what does that mean? It's more than just being a Eucharistic minister or running a ministry or things like that. Those things are necessary and good. Like, I hope I didn't come off too hard, but like, those things are necessary and good, but that's not the primary call of the laity. And here, the church is actually saying, without the laity doing their job, the church's mission is not going to succeed. We need an active laity. We need a laity that's rooted in their relationship with God and understands their identity and their mission, right? Relationship, identity, mission. So one piece of that identity is laity as priest. Now we're going to go through all of this. When you hear laity as priest, I think we have to start with a very, very basic question. A very simple question about that phrase, laity as priest. And that question is, well then what is a priest? What do we mean by the word priest? Right? If you looked on your handout, you can see Scott Hahn defines priest in a certain way. He says, a priest is an authorized mediator who offers sacrifice to God on behalf of others. Christ is the perfect priest, for he is perfectly united to God in his divinity and fully united to us in his humanity. So, a priest is a mediator who acts before God for the sake of others. Right? So, an authorized mediator that offers sacrifice on behalf of one for the sake, to God on behalf of others. Right? And Christ being the perfect one because he's completely God and completely man. He bridges that gap most perfectly. Okay? Lumen Gentium, the Vatican document basically that gives us the blueprint of the church, right? On this call of the laity in their priestly identity says, the supreme and eternal priest, Christ Jesus, since he wills to continue his witness and service, also through the laity, vivifies, that's bring to life. So it brings them to life in this spirit, and increasingly urges them to every good and perfect work. So like, this whole priestly call is a really big deal. And it's Christ is basically inviting every lay person. He's basically giving the lay people an ability and a call and like an animating spirit to go out and to continue his priesthood in the world. For besides intimately linking them to his life and his mission, he also gives them a sharing in his priestly function of offering spiritual worship for the glory of God and the salvation of men. So, the laity are called to share in Christ's priestly function, in his very own priestly function. Right? Now, to understand, like I said a little bit ago, to understand the priesthood that Christ is inviting the laity into, we have to understand the priesthood that Christ not only embraced, but fulfilled. So we've got to step back and go to the Old Testament. Because only through understanding the priest of the Old Testament and how Christ fulfills that, can we understand how the layperson now is called to fulfill, or called to continue Christ's mission, Christ's priestly mission. So, we can look at Abel. Everybody knows the story of Cain and Abel. For the most part, they're the two sons of Adam and Eve. They offer up their sacrifices to God. Cain decides he's going to offer up a little bit lesser sacrifice. Abel offers first fruit, the fatty portion of the firstlings of his flock. So he offers the first fruits, the choice portion. That's who he offers up. That's who he offers. So we see Abel offering up his first, the fatlings of his thing, the fat lamb. So that's who Abel decides he's offering up to God. He's going to give God the best. So what happens? God looks with favor on Abel's, and not on Cain's offering. Okay? So Cain ends up, just out of jealousy, out of spite, kills his brother. And it was because God chose Abel over Cain, even though Cain was the older and all these things, all these social things. God chose the younger, the smaller, because what? He gave the best. Right? So he offers up first fruits. We look at another priest of the Old Testament, we run into Melchizedek. Now Melchizedek, if you've ever gone to an ordination, you've heard the word Melchizedek like 10 times. And everybody's kind of like, who is this Old Testament dude that nobody really knows, and most people don't know how to say his name. Well, Melchizedek, we know basically 3 things about Melchizedek. And I have a little bit about him a little bit of the scripture on him. But we know 3 things. He was the king of Salem. He was a priest that offered up bread and wine, as opposed to the flesh of like an animal. And that Abram, who becomes Abraham, gives him a tenth of everything. So we know that he's a king, that he is really into tithing, and that he offers up bread and wine. That's basically the 3 things we know about him. But I think the key of those 3 things is that he offers up bread and wine, right? That's what he offers up for fitting sacrifice to God. And then the last one of the Old Testament is who we read just now as our opening prayer, is Abraham and Isaac. The story of Abraham and Isaac is one that we can see a lot of parallels between Jesus and his passion, right? The only son is called on to be the sacrifice. Not only is he called on to be the sacrifice, he literally carries the wood that he's going to be sacrificed on up the mountain. Like, the parallels are obvious. The parallels are there. But what we see is he doesn't get sacrificed. there's a point and it stops. It's just that there's this poverty of spirit on Abraham's part where he's going to let go of even his only son. Even his only son who was given to him late in life and all these things, right? So, again, we see the sacrifice, the sacrificial nature right here. So all three of these men, with Abel we see sacrifice, and he offers up first fruits. With Melchizedek, we see sacrifice, and what does he offer up? Bread and wine. And then with Isaac and Abraham, sorry if you can't see him on this side, but Isaac and Abraham, we also see sacrifice of the willingness to sacrifice an only son. Right? So all three of these things are going to be taken up and fulfilled in Christ in a new way. But also we can't ignore the priesthood of the old covenant, right? So the priesthood of the old covenant. I don't know what that was just saying. Particularly comes out on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. So Yom means day in Hebrew. Kippur means to atone. So the day that we are to atone, we see this is the day where we hear of every family bringing a lamb. When the family brings the lamb, that unblemished young child, like firstling, right? This unblemished lamb is brought in. The lamb is slain, and the sins of the people are forgiven through the lamb being slain. I want to say there's also the element of the scapegoat that goes on with the Day of Atonement, where for the Day of Atonement, the people come to the priest. They tell their sins to the priest. The priest then would whisper into a goat's ear the sins of the people and lay his hands on the goat. Now, this sounds kind of like trivial or whatever, but if you think about it, the laying on of hands in the Old Testament was a sign that we're going to lay whatever sins have been given onto this which is to be sacrificed. Now, if you fast forward to today, if you've ever gone to an ordination, one of the signs of ordination is the laying on of hands. So the same sign in the Old Covenant that used to say, this is the one that's to be sacrificed for the sake of many, is the same sign that's used today for a priest ordination or for a deacon's ordination, where they lay hands and say, this is the one that's to be sacrificed for the sake of many in a whole different way. Right? It sounds trivial in the Old Testament, but a lot of our symbolism comes from that. Right? So what would happen is they would lay the sins of the people on this goat. And then the goat would be brought out into the wilderness and killed. Basically, they would kind of wander off. They would throw it off a cliff. They had like this whole... I've seen like pictures of them literally just chunking a goat off a mountain. It's kind of funny and sad at the same time for the goat. But what is the priest doing in this? Right? The priest would go into... So I have these three pictures here. The first one is a sketch of the tabernacle whenever the Israelites were still coming through before they got to the promised land. What they would do is the Ark of the Covenant would be here in this Holy of Holies. They had a curtain, and then there was the holy place. That's what this picture is here. Just kind of an artist's rendition of what it looked like. The cloud of glory, that God's presence, the pillar of fire, that would basically take up their sacrifice whenever they were being burned. So this is what they built. This place was basically like portable. Now I can imagine, like I've tailgated in things before, and like a pop-up tent and a barbecue pit is enough to bring around. Just imagine bringing around something that looks like this, where you have all of these walls and all this, like these curtains and things that have to be put out to like particular specification. Why? Because it's for God. It's not for a bunch of frat boys or sorority girls. Like, it's for God. It's not something that we're just going to set up and like tailgate, right? So this thing is like a very, very intricate kind of thing. So you wonder why they were walking around in the desert for 40 years. It's probably because it took them that long to get get it down on how to set this thing up and tear it down. But after they get into the Holy Land, after they get into the Promised Land, right, they build another temple. I think it's Solomon that builds the temple. Solomon builds his temple, and it's massive. It's beautiful, right? Again, though, there's the Holy of Holies. That's the place just for God. That's the place for no one else, just for God. So much so that, like, the days whenever the priests were to go in and to burn incense, or if they would go in and sprinkle blood of one of the sacrifices, they would tie a cord to the priest's leg. Because if he would be to do something wrong or to touch the ark at the wrong time, and he wasn't completely pure, he was struck dead. And that was the only way they could get him out, because no one else was supposed to go in. So they would literally just drag him out. And then the last one is, basically, it was after one of the captivities, the temple is destroyed. And then another temple is built back up. And then this one's destroyed around 70 AD. It's about 40 years or so after Christ died. Why do I say all this? The priests in these places, whenever they were doing this whole ritual of laying hands on the scapegoat, the goat was sent out and it was killed and the sins were forgiven, the priests were serving as mediators of Yahweh. That's the tetragrammaton. That's the 10-cent word of saying Yahweh. I am who am. The name that was revealed to Moses, right? But the priest is serving as a mediator of Yahweh's mercy. This was his way of God's way of forgiving sins of his people. We take for granted the whole idea of being able to go to confession, but our confession we're given that ability to go to confession because of a way that it was instituted by Christ, and it's through Christ's one sacrifice on the cross, which we're going to get to in a second. One more note that's pretty cool about this whole thing: when they would send out the goat what they would do is they would have a scarlet wool. And this is in, I think it's Josephus. He was a very, very ancient scholar of. He would be similar to our Clement of Rome or our Augustine or somebody. Like, he's one of them guys that was around whenever they were doing all this Jewish stuff, right? When they were doing all these Jewish worship things. And what they used to do is they would take a scarlet cord and they would tie it to one of the horns of the goat. The goat would go out. And then they would take another one and they would tie it to a certain post near the temple. When the goat would die, the cord that was red would miraculously turn white. And this thing was happening every time, every year. This kept going on. Josephus reports that about 40 years before the temple was destroyed, the miracle stopped. What happened 40 years before, roughly 40 years before the temple was destroyed? If the temple was destroyed in 70, that's around the 30s, early 30s, that's when Jesus was the one sacrifice. So we as Catholics look at that and we're like, it's obvious. Their miracle that had been going on for centuries before stops whenever Christ dies. Because the one sacrifice is offered. So, to review real quick, Abel offers first fruits. Melchizedek offers bread and wine. Abraham and Isaac, you see the only son being offered. And the Jewish priests, in their offering, serve as a mediator of Yahweh's mercy. Christ fulfills all of them. Christ raises them all. He raises the bar for the priesthood of the Old Testament. He is the first fruits because he's the one who was before all things. He offers bread and wine, but he doesn't just offer it as bread and wine as a symbol or as the Jewish custom, but he offers it as his body, blood, soul, and divinity. He is the only Son, the one Son of the Trinity. And he is God's mediator of mercy by being the overall arching expiation for sin. If we read in Hebrews, the author of Hebrews says, the main point of which has been said is this: we have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, a minister of the sanctuary, so a minister of the sanctuary, a priest, and of the true tabernacle that the Lord not man set up. Now every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Thus the necessity for this one also to have something to offer. If then he were on earth, he would not be a priest, since there are those who offer gifts according to the law. They worship in a copy and shadow of the heavenly sanctuary, as Moses was warned when he was about to erect the tabernacle. For he says, see that you make everything according to the pattern shown to you on the mountain. Now he has obtained so much more excellent a ministry, as he is mediator of a better covenant, enacted on better promises. Sacrifice in the Old Testament is offered to establish a covenant between God and his people, and it repeatedly happens. This sacrifice, the sacrifice of the cross, becomes the new covenant. Right? It brings in a new covenant, an eternal covenant. Why? Because the sacrifice is eternal. Jesus, as the Son, is eternal. If we keep going, Christi Fidelis Laity, the document from John Paul II in 88. Like, this is where he starts to kind of bring in, what does all this priesthood stuff mean for us? Right? So all of this backstory of Christ as being the fulfillment of the Old Testament priesthood, that's fine and dandy, but it's not theology just for theology's sake. Like, what does it mean for the layperson? What does it mean for us today? What does it mean for the lay people in today's world, 2016? The lay faithful are sharers in the priestly mission for which Jesus offered himself on the cross and continues to be offered in the celebration of the Eucharist for the glory of God and the salvation of humanity. Right? Incorporated in Jesus Christ, the baptized are united to him and to his sacrifice in the offering they make of themselves and their daily activities. So, basically what John Paul II is saying is, what is your sacrifice? Like, what is the way that you as a layperson are called to offer sacrifice? Offering they make of themselves and their daily activities. So in what ways do you sacrifice in yourself? And in day-to-day, what are the ways that you sacrifice in your daily activities? It seems so much smaller than everything else, but no, that's those small things, those small yeses to God, those small sacrifices that we make. Those are the things that build up into saints. Like living your life in your context and being willing to offer sacrifice in the office building, in your family, in whichever way God moves you. Like that's the stuff that makes modern day saints. Lumen Gentium says, for all their works, prayers, and apostolic endeavors, their ordinary married and family life, their daily occupations, their physical and mental relaxation, if carried out in the Spirit, and even the hardships of life, if patiently borne, all become spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Like, look at that. Things as trivial, as small as our works, things as small as the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the grace that we say before meals, or the 15 minutes spending in daily prayer, right? Because everybody's spending 15 minutes in daily prayer. Apostolic endeavors, so things within the parish. Ordinary married and family life. So like bringing the kids to soccer practice, or taking care of grandchildren, or school, like homework, like their daily occupations. So if you're a lawyer, a garbage man, you cut grass for a living, you're an astronaut, like the smallest to the greatest, right? Daily occupations, they're physical and mental relaxation. So the way in which that we just take a break, all of this, and even the hardships, like the hardships are the ones that I think we oftentimes it's easier to make sense of. We can offer that up. Right? Like I got a pulled hamstring and I'm trying to walk. I can offer that up every step, right? But like it's all those joys and those easy things. Those simple things, those mundane things. All of that. The church herself is saying can become spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God. Like all of these things can be moments of worship. It seems like a pious idea, like to just be walking around like, oh man, the sun's out, praise God. Or like that, praise. But like, if it's done with the right disposition, it's not just empty words. If it's done with the right disposition, like, yeah, the grass is green, praise God. Like the most mundane thing, right? Yeah, praise God. Like, oh man, my car started and I got to work on time, praise God. Like simple, small things really can be sacrificial. They can be fitting sacrifice to God. The same kind of sacrifice that in the Old Testament used to wipe away sins and that used to get consumed by a pillar of fire. Right? That same kind of sacrifice is what we get a chance to offer up every moment of our day. In the most mundane, most boring spot possible. Peter. St. Peter in his first letter. Now, if some people have said, well, I took a class on Peter's epistles, on the Catholic epistles in class, like at school this past semester, or last semester or something, and we had a discussion, but one of the things that 1 Peter has a nickname for is being called the first encyclical. If you know what an encyclical is, encyclical, it comes from like a word that means circular. It's a circulating letter for the church. So like when Pope Francis writes an encyclical, he means for every Catholic to read it. Right? It's supposed to be like a general letter to everyone. Well, 1 Peter, our first pope, writes a letter, and it gets put in the Bible. It probably is the first encyclical, the first letter that's meant for everyone to read. Right? In that, he says, "Come to him a living stone, rejected by human beings, but chosen and precious in the sight of God. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." Our first pope said the same thing. Our first pope said, and speaking to a Jewish context, said, be a holy priesthood of people. Like God, Jesus didn't come to establish a club. He didn't come to establish some kind of like group that's just supposed to be here and be in existence and be closed. No. He came to establish a group of priests as Christians. Not just priests in the hierarchy, but priests as Christians. To offer what? Spiritual sacrifice. So to offer up all of those things that Lumen Gentium talks about. Your daily life. Your relaxation. Right? Everything. So our spiritual sacrifices. What do they look like? How many people have done this before? According to the clock, it's 2:27 in this picture. It's dark, the baby's crying, the guy is just like, I'm done. I'm tired. How many people have done that before? That's the time to offer up a spiritual sacrifice. How many parents? I think every parent at some point makes that sacrifice. And why? For their children. For their grandchildren. Right? How about here? Who's had that face before? I know I've had that face before. And that face before. I know I made that the other day. And that face right there is probably the funniest one. Where you just, I'm done. These kids are a handful. They're too much. Right? Like, honestly. Whenever that overwhelming feeling just starts to hit, when like it's appropriate, I have a spiritual sacrifice that I can make to the Lord, that I can offer up to God. Working. Job's just killing me, man. I'm done. Throw the glasses on the table and just start wiping your face because you're done. Because you got 15 things to do and about 30 minutes to do them. Right? How often is... That's basically... I think that's a caricature right now of basically men in our society. Where it's just... most men are so tied to work. That's where it ends up. And this is probably a caricature of most women in our society. Where, okay, he's working, so I got everything else laid on me. Right? But still, that can be spiritual sacrifice. Students, how many times have you had 14 coffee cups and 3 energy drinks? And if you look closely, the glare's bad, but if you look closely, that says Finals Week, the Force Awakens. How many times has that happened? I know that happened to me about a month ago. But that's what it looks. I mean, college. That's what it looks like. You're just worn out. Most of the time, the joke that I had when I was at LSU back in the day was, you have 3 things: good grades, social life, and sleep. And you pick 2 and go with it. I definitely picked sleep and a social life. But so that's. I have to say that because my mom's sitting right there. She knows. Oh, she knows. But all these things, like those are the struggles that can be offered up as that spiritual sacrifice. Now, we're never going to remember to offer that up as spiritual sacrifice. If what? And this is going to be a plug for where we're going, but if what? If we're not in what? Relationship first. If you're not praying, when that happens, when you're just done with your kids, you're not going to think to offer it up as spiritual sacrifice. If you're not praying when finals week sneaks up on you because you didn't know all semester that this was coming, right? But if you're not praying, if you're not actively and intimately engaged in a prayer life, when 3 tests are tomorrow, you're not going to think to offer this up as spiritual sacrifice. That's why relationship is the first step and the most important step. And it's the continued step that we go back to. That's why I'm going to say a lot about identity, and every time I'm going to come back to relationship. Because what? When these things happen, when these little opportunities to offer up spiritual sacrifice, if we're not attuned to the voice of God in that, if we're not recognizing God's voice in these situations, we're losing countless opportunities to offer it up. Right? Like that was an older generation. That was their motto in the Catholic Church, right? It was offer it up. Just offer it up. Just offer it up. And a lot of times it just really gave a lot of... I'm trying to think of words that wouldn't be censored. It would just really get you angry. Because whenever it gets to that, when I'm in that mode, here, the last thing I want to hear is offer it up. But if I'm in relationship with Jesus, if I'm in an active and intimate prayer life, you know what? That face may happen, but I'm going to know where to go with it. Lumen Gentium again says, together with the offering of the Lord's body, they are most fitting, the laity, are most fittingly offered in the celebration of the Eucharist. Thus, also those everywhere who adore in holy activity, the laity consecrate the world to God. These opportunities, these small sacrifices, this is what when we bring, and this is going to be kind of a hint to what's to come, but when we come to Mass, and the priest says, my sacrifice and yours, what are you thinking about at that spot? These are the things to think about. Those small sacrifices that we've been offering up all through the week, that's what we bring to Mass. That's what we don't bring. We don't bring a lamb to the priest to be offered up as sacrifice. We bring these things. We bring our daily activities. We bring our relaxation. We bring our family life. We bring our work. We bring those struggles. We bring my mom getting cancer or my dad dying. We bring the heavy stuff. That's what we bring to Mass. And it's offered up at the hands of the priest. But we as priests, the laity as priests, when you guys come to Mass, that's the stuff you're handing to Father. That's the stuff you're handing to the ministerial priest. You see, the common priesthood and the ministerial priesthood are not supposed to be opposed to one another. We're supposed to work with one another. That's the vision of the church when it comes to the laity as priests. That this is what we bring to Mass. My sacrifice and yours. So at the end, if you want to write it in, add that to the homework section. When you go to Mass this week, what's your sacrifice you're bringing? Now I have a short video from Robert Barron. And that's actually a decent segue. I have a short video with Robert Barron. And in this video, I want you to ignore the question that the guy asked. Because the guy asked the question of, why not women priests? Right? That's the question. But Robert Barron doesn't really answer that question because it's a lot longer than a 2-minute video. And if you want to hear that, we can talk about that later. But that's the subject of another talk. But Robert Barron hits on another thing. So the guy asks, why not women priests? And Robert Barron's response is very simple. He says, oftentimes, when we're looking for a question about why not women priests, we're wondering why is the Catholic Church against giving power to somebody else? Right? It's this question of power. And notice where he says power lies in the church. It's not with the hierarchy. Okay? So I'm going to play this video real quick, but I just wanted to give that as kind of a premise. So don't get thrown off by the question, because the question really doesn't fit with what we're talking about. But here you go.
A lot of people I know say unless the church allows women to be priests or have more of an active role, they're not going to be part of it.
Yeah, it's a famously complicated issue, and I can't possibly get into all the angles of it. I just make this observation. A lot of it has to do with power and the right construal of power. Power for us is not primarily an institutional manner, as though unless and until I get institutional power, I'm not really powerful. In the church, power comes from being a saint. The saints are those who have so surrendered their lives to Christ that he's able to work powerfully through them. So, for example, in the 19th century in France, who were by no question about it, the two most powerful Catholics were Bernadette of Lourdes and Thérèse of Lisieux, two women, two saints, who allowed the power of Christ to move through them in this deeply transformative way. I would say to those who want power in the church, look first for that power. And you can start being a saint today. Nothing's stopping you. Man or woman, child, anyone can be a saint. Thomas Aquinas said, you want to be a saint? Will it. Want it. Desire it. And that can happen today. And there's no institutional obstacle to you. And then you really channel the power that can change the world.
So you don't have to be a priest to do that.
No, and priests exist for one purpose in the church, to serve the laity. Priests are there to make the laity holy. That's our job. The whole purpose of the church for everybody is to become a saint. That's that line from Léon Blois I love, which is, there's only one real sadness in life, not to be a saint. Everything else is trivial. The one sadness is that you miss your opportunity to be a saint. So the whole purpose of sacraments, liturgy, prayer, priesthood, everything is to make saints. So people can overstate the importance of priests and priesthood. Priests are servants of sanctity. Well, start being a saint today.
The power's not in the priesthood. The power's not with the bishops. The power's not with the pope. The power's where? With the saints. That's what we're called to. We're called to a life we're called to have a church. We're called to a life that's really devoted to producing saints with our church. So how are we doing with that? If you think, like, I'm going to steal an image from Father Mike Schmitz, guy, he's a great homilist. If you want to put him on your podcast list, he's amazing. One of his homilies that he had from a few years ago, he gave this image at the very beginning of it, and he says, imagine a shoe factory, right? So imagine this high-tech, state-of-the-art shoe factory that's built. And in this shoe factory, they have all the latest equipment. They got all the best equipment that you can possibly have for building shoes, for making shoes, producing them, wrapping them, and sending them out. They got the best marketing team you can possibly think of for this company that's going to produce shoes and ship them out. Right? They're selling their shoes for a lower price than everybody else, even though they have the best leather and the best rubber. They got everything you need every day. They got everybody working there. Everybody's feeling good and happy and doing. Oh yeah, everybody's happy about where they work and how they're doing things, right? Every day they got trucks coming in with leather and rubber, and like they are rolling. And at the end of the quarter, at the end of the half, like at the half point of the year, and at the end of the fiscal year, they didn't make a shoe one. How are they doing as a shoe factory? Having all the prettiest stuff, having all the best stuff doesn't make a good shoe factory, right? Producing good shoes makes a good shoe factory. We as a church, our mission is to what? To make saints. How are we doing making great saints today? And I don't say that as accusatory. I don't say that as like looking down on anybody, because quite honestly, there's a lot of holy people in the world, and there's a lot of holy people that are living their lives and doing their thing in the mundane stuff of life, and that's what we're called to do. Like hopefully, that question of how are we doing producing saints? Hopefully, the first place we look is at ourselves. How am I doing following and living out my mission to be a saint? To be intimately and actively engaged in a relationship and coming to understand my life, my role in my baptism, the dignity and the identity that's given to me by my baptism as a priest. I got 3 examples of people that understood. The first of which, anybody know who that is? The 2 babies. Gianna Mola. Yes. Awesome. Gianna Mola was a doctor. She was really good with like gynecology and stuff. She died through complications with her pregnancy. Like when she was like practicing medicine and stuff, she wanted to be out like during her life, like in the fringes of society, out in like mission territory, serving poor people that needed help, right? She couldn't do it because she was kind of sickly. Well, she ended up dying because of complications due to a pregnancy. With that pregnancy, she was given the opportunity to abort the baby. She said no. She would not abort her child. They also gave her the opportunity to have a hysterectomy that would have ended the life of the child, but wouldn't have, and would have saved her life. Because of, like, that would have been okay because the idea was not that she was having a direct abortion. She wasn't killing the child directly, right? So she goes through this. She says, no, I want to save my baby's life. I'm going to take the risk of putting the onus of, like, I'm going to pay the bill of death if that's what comes checked for. Like that's what comes knocking, right? And she does. Gianna Mola. She understood an idea of spiritual sacrifice. A life that not only knew it in small things, but in big things as well. The next one of my favorites. Pier Giorgio Frassati. Pier Giorgio Frassati, if you notice, he was a good-looking cat, sportsman, outdoorsy, He's standing on top of a mountain with a walking stick and a pipe. Like, this is the kind of guy that, like, he's a man's man, right? There's pictures of him all over the place of, like, him hanging out with his friends and just smiling and laughing. He's dressed in, like, a three-piece suit, looks like a member of the Rat Pack. Hopefully not with the same backstory. But what we have is, he was from one of the, like, most prominent and prestigious families in his part of Italy. This guy was just awesome. He was a good-looking guy. He was rich. He was funny. He was charismatic. Like, everything would have said that this guy was going to live a life that was just going to be... He had every opportunity to live a life that would have been debaucherous and just get whatever he wants and use whoever he wants on the way to it, right? But that's not what he did. What he did was the money that was being given to him, he felt a real soft spot to give to the poor. So his family would, like, fork out money to him, like almost like an allowance. And he would take it and he would eat, like, beans and like he was just eating, like, cheap food for himself and giving the rest away. He was keeping just enough to keep up the look that he had money. Like, if you went to Mass today, the readings were about almsgiving and not making sure that you wash your face if you're fasting and, like, you don't pray out in the street. And, like, it was all about, for him, he lived that. He made sure to keep his sacrifices secret. The only way that it came known was he ended up dying at about 24. I think it was through some kind of health stuff. And what happened was his family, who was all these prominent people, thought at the funeral that the church would be full, but it would be full of, like, the high and mighty of the area. Turns out thousands of poor people lined the street for him. There was overflow into the like this public square because of the impact that he had on the poor. And then lastly, some of our newest saints. Louis and Zelly Martin. They're the first couple to be canonized saints together. And their feast day is their wedding day, which I just think is one of the coolest things ever. They were married. They're married. Before they were married, they both seriously discerned religious life. They both seriously, he was seriously considering priesthood. She was seriously considering convent. Their life was built on prayer. Their life as a family was built on prayer, on sacrificing for one another. She would die of breast cancer, and he would battle mental illness for years. He would be in a psychiatric hospital for 3 years. They had 5 daughters, all five of which were nuns. 4 went into the Carmelite monastery. 1 became another sister of some other type. One of them that went into the Carmelite monastery was St. Therese of Lisieux. So you have a family that understood how to offer up spiritual sacrifice in the mundane, in the small part of life, right? In the hidden part of life. All 3 of these people understood. 4 people. All 3 of these feast days. So all of these people, though, they knew what it meant. They understood what it meant and what it looked like to live in that relationship first and be ready and willing when God called to offer up those spiritual sacrifices. All of them understood how to be a priest in their own, in their own context, in their own situation. So to us, we look at them, we look at the teaching on what the church holds up as laity, as priests. It's our turn. It's our turn to be a Gianna Molla, a Giorgio Frassati, or a Louis and Zelly Martin. How are we answering that call? Being able to be that priest in the context that we've been given. It first and foremost begins where? In an intimate and active relationship with God. It has to begin there. If not, we're going to miss every opportunity. Say Prasadi's not, and the poor person passes him. He's going to keep the money. Say Mola's not. She may be just selfish enough to say, nah, then the abortion will work. Say that they're not. He may have left her, she may have left him because of the struggles and the health issues that they had going on. We're called to something bigger than that. And these 4 people knew it. And they practiced it. So that's our call, is to live out the priesthood, not just like these, but like Jesus Christ.